Hey everybody, I'm Scott Butwell and welcome to my YouTube channel. And what I want to share with you in this video is I want to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and share with you my revision process, how I revise a story on medium.com. And I know it's tempting when you write a story to kind of think like a high school student. I teach high school, and what I've noticed high school students do, especially the freshmen, but probably also the seniors, is they write that first draft, if they write their first draft, and they're just happy to be done, so they don't even consider the process of revising unless I really kind of teach them how to do it. I think it's tempting for medium writers to do the same thing. You're just happy when you get done with that first draft. You don't really want to revise. But I've found when I revise my texts on Medium, those are usually my top earning stories. And I'm writing a memoir too. And my goal, my belief is when you revise your stories, is you're showing care for your story, and you're showing care for your reader to make it tell that story as best as you can. So in this video, I want to share with you guys a little bit about my revision process. And I was shocked when I read George Saunders A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, because basically my revision process that I've been using for about 7 years on a memoir I've been writing is the same as George Saunders. So that was really affirming to see that I use the same process as him. I love what he says first about your rough draft. This is what he says. He says, "Who cares if a first draft is any good? It doesn't need to be any good. It just needs to be so that you can revise it." I love that because basically he's saying, you're going to react and change your first draft most likely. Maybe just a little bit by micro-editing it, or maybe in a whole new way where you use it as a springboard to come up with something totally different. So that's completely freeing, that you don't have to be caught up in this trap of perfectionism on your first draft. And so in the rest of this video, I want to share with you 5 tips from George Saunders and from me, because I use these tips too, on how to go about revising your draft to make it as good as you can, to really care about that story. Tip number 1, reread and react to what you have written. So George Saunders' method for revision is he imagines that he has a meter attached to his forehead. And that meter has like a positive needle and a negative needle. And what he tries to do is read his own text as if it was written by someone else. So he's kind of emotionally detaching from his own writing. And so he's reading and reacting to his own text. And if he's reading it and the negative needle moves, basically what he does is he stops and he really listens for a suggestion on how to make that part of the text better. So negative needle is just, him being able to make some kind of little micro changes or bigger changes, to his text to make it better. And if he's reading and positive needle moves, basically that's his way of saying, hey, this part of the text, I really nailed it. I got this part, it's working, I don't need to change anything. So basically he's just kind of going through line by line, micro-editing, and just trying to fine-tune it and make it better. Really, what I would say he's doing is listening to his text and letting his text, kind of guide him on the changes that need to be made to make it better. Tip number 2, cut the fluff. Cut the fluff. Cut the fluff is pretty self-explanatory, especially when you're writing for online writing. You have to realize that there's a lot of readers who are just giving your story just a little bit of a chance to see if they're going to stay with it. So whenever I share my links to my stories on Medium with my brother, we both always look at, is there any part of the story that's just not really essential, any part that's kind of superfluous or not really necessary? And to me, that's usually the part where you can cut. It's just kind of fluff. It's not part of the essential core of the story. And I think, especially with online reading, you just got to kind of cut those parts, because, the truth is people are not really giving your story as much, usually attention, maybe as they would if it was a book. Even in books, though, people just kind of bail on those too. How many times have you bought a book where you just say you're going to read it, you never do, right? So cut the fluff. Anything that's not really essential and maybe gets a little bit off the point, definitely cut that, because that's where, especially with online writing, that's when people could bail and not read your story. You don't want that to happen. Tip number 3, ask yourself, what is missing? The opposite of cut the fluff is sometimes when I'm using George Saunders' method is sometimes I notice as I'm really listening to my text, It's not so much the line by line micro edits that I'm looking at. Is sometimes I've noticed I'm missing stuff, that there's like some essential core part of the story. Usually for me, a lot of times it's emotions, like maybe I'm writing about a topic and I don't really drill down deep to talk about my emotions on that particular subject. And that whole key part is emotions that's missing in my story. And one thing I always like to say, if you don't have any emotion in your story, there's going to be no emotional connection for your reader, and no emotional connection with your reader, they're probably just going to bail, right? So when you're revising, a good thing to look for is what's missing, what's some kind of maybe emotions or maybe some key event that you have just left out. So really look for what is missing. Tip number 4, look at the macro structure of your text. Macro structure is kind of the opposite of micro structure. So macro structure with a story on Medium is you're looking at the different parts of a story. So for example, you're looking at the beginning, you're looking at the middle, you're looking at the title, you're looking at the ending, you're looking at the subheads, you're looking at how you use quotation marks or quotations. And then for me, the most important part of a story on Medium is the beginning. People are either going to stay with your story or they're going to bail. That's the truth. You can look at your read percent on stories. If it's at 30%, they read a little tiny bit and then they bailed, right? So you got to do whatever you can in that opening to make sure you nail the opening, right? I believe emotion is so important. Maybe right from a little first person standpoint, draw people in, make them care about your story, make them connect to your story. Again, no emotional connection to you in your story, no emotional connection to their story. They just, hey, why bother, right? So again, whatever you got to do, make that opening really stick. And I've written openings, one yesterday, and I just felt like it didn't have the emotion. So, start over, just be humble and admit the opening wasn't any good, and revise it and start over. And then the middle part, obviously to me, the middle part, you really want to deliver on whatever the promise was in your title. And as far as the title goes, the title is so important, right? You could have the Pulitzer Prize winning story, as my brother says, but no one is going to read that story unless you have a really good title that makes people click. So to me, a good title, by the way, it makes people curious about your story, right? Maybe it has some emotional, connotative words. I like short ones, maybe 5 to 10 words max. Or it could deliver or explain a benefit that you're going to receive from this story. People are practical as they read. They want to see what they're going to get from a story, unless maybe it's a memoir story. Then you just want to make that people curious about your title. So the middle part, again, is where you really want to maintain that interest that people have. You want to kind of carry them along from sentence to sentence and just really deliver some meat, something of value, whether it's a story or whatever topic you're writing about. Just make people feel like your story is something they can't put down. Whatever you got to do, whatever technique you got to use, just depends on each story, but just make people want to keep reading. So again, to me, emotion is kind of how I am leaning right now, is make people care about your story. And then the part that I feel most people blow, including myself, is the ending. The ending, you have to realize people have invested in your story, and you want to kind of tell them, so what? Why does this story matter? What does it mean? So that's to me where, again, you dig down deep and you really kind of deliver some kind of thought or feeling about why this story matters. And again, of course, your subheads, you want to carry people along from one part of the story to the next. So really nail those subheads, the little bold headings. And again, you want to have quotations with some hyperlinks. That's how you get your stories curated, with hyperlinking stuff and substantiating some of the claims you made with those hyperlinks. So macro structure, just look and see if you nailed each part of the macro structure. Tip number 5, be willing to rethink what you have written. One thing I did in the most recent story that I wrote was I just had to reread it, George Saunders method, and I had to really rethink that story. So revision to me, if you were to put it in a little definition, is that you're rethinking, everything you've written, Again, you're looking at the macro structure, you're looking at, what you want to accomplish in that story. And I think, sometimes you have to rethink your story in the sense of, it's not just little micro edits, but you have to rethink Am I really saying what I want to say in the story? You have to be able to rethink different parts of the story that maybe you're writing about some part, and as you think about that part, maybe you want to, describe it in a little bit different way, or maybe you see it in a little bit different way. So to me, this is where you really show your chops as a writer. Are you really willing, as you reread your text, to be able to just chunk a whole part of it, just get rid of it if it's no good, and just kind of say, hey, this part I want to have more passion. What I had there just wasn't working. It needs to be changed. So are you really willing to rethink everything about a story, or at least parts of it that aren't working? So there you have it, everybody. There's 5 things you can revise when you're looking at your text on Medium. Let me see if I can sum them up for you. Number 1, read and react to what you've written. So have that meter on your head, positive, negative. When you have that negative meter, just listen for those suggestions that pop up. Number 2, cut the fluff. Just tighten your story to any parts that aren't really necessary, that are superfluous. Just get rid of those parts. Number 3, look for what's missing. Sometimes we have details, important details, or feelings that you might have left out. So look for what you might have forgotten to add. And number 4, this is an important one, is look at your microstructure. Just look at the core parts of a story. Beginning, middle, end, title. Those are the main parts, right? So just look at you're nailing each one of those. And lastly, be willing to rethink every part of your story just to make sure that it's going to deliver to your reader in a satisfactory way. Care about your reader. Care about your story, and care about the experience your reader is going to get from your story. And lastly, if you've never subscribed, click on that notification. I like to create helpful, actionable tips on the craft of writing for a medium. So if you want to receive these videos, just click on that notification. Happy writing, everybody.